They were clapping. That's what I heard first. Not the music, not her laugh, not the sound of her heels brushing the polished floor as she leaned back into his arms. The clapping, sharp, clean, enthusiastic, like this was something worth celebrating. A woman dipped in a red dress, a man catching her like he'd caught her before, and a crowd of strangers mistaking betrayal for choreography. It was the 5th night of our honeymoon cruise. My wife was at the center of the ballroom dancing with a man I'd never seen before. She moved like the song had been written for her. He moved like he'd memorized her. Their bodies folded into each other, then separated, then collided again. No hesitation, no awkwardness, no doubt. She smiled. He spun her. She landed in his arms like that's where she belonged. I stood at the entrance, maybe 10 feet from the floor. Not hidden, not loud, just watching. Nobody knew who I was, which made the humiliation worse. To them, I was just another husband on vacation, not the man she was supposed to be dancing with. She didn't see me at first, or maybe she did and didn't care. He dipped her low, deep enough that her hair brushed the floor. She didn't resist. She laughed. Not a forced laugh, not a nervous one, the kind that lives in your throat when you're exactly where you want to be. A few phones went up. One guy said, "Damn, they're good." A woman in heels leaned toward her date and whispered, "They've got real chemistry." And I just stood there, watching, listening, grinding my molars together to keep my jaw from shaking. The song was ending. You could feel it in the way their steps slowed. She leaned her head against his. He said something in her ear. She nodded. The music stopped. They held the final pose. Applause filled the room like a verdict. Then her eyes found mine. It took her a second, just long enough to register that I'd seen all of it. Her smile faded. Not completely, just enough for me to see the mask slip, the one she kept for the public, for the stage. She stood upright again, stepped back from him slowly. She didn't run, didn't rush over, didn't explain. He followed her gaze, turned, saw me, and smiled. He grabbed a towel from the chair beside the floor, wiped his neck, and walked toward me like we were two dads meeting after a PTA recital. "You must be her husband," he said. No tension, no hesitation, like he was doing me a favor. I didn't answer. He kept going, just giving her a night to remember. That was the sentence. That was the moment. The one where something broke. Not in my face, not in my body, but in the part of me that still believed people had limits. My name is Daniel Briggs, 42 years old, 17 years with the NYPD major crimes. I've seen mothers pull bodies from freezers. I've pulled men off rooftops who swore they had nothing left to lose. I've been lied to by grieving families and confessions wrapped in tears. But I've never, and not once, been tested like this. I adjusted my jacket, felt the badge under the fabric. Didn't reach for it, didn't show it. It wasn't about that. Not here. Not yet. I looked at him, then at her, then back at him. I stepped closer, leaned in, said one sentence, just one. His smile shifted, only slightly, but he held the posture. He didn't flinch. Neither did I. I turned around, walked away. No threat, no promise, no explosion. Just a man watching something die inside of him and choosing not to let anyone else see it happen. They watched me go, her, him, the crowd, but no one followed, no one called after me, no one tried to explain, because they all thought the show was over. It wasn't. I wasn't always this quiet. There was a time when I would have said something, in that ballroom, in front of everyone. There was a time when I believed that speaking up meant strength. Now I know better. You don't always speak when you're hurt. Sometimes you just tighten your jaw and wait for the moment you won't regret. We met 13 years ago, on the subway. She was humming a jazz tune, off-key, confidently. She didn't care who was watching. That's what struck me first. She moved like she owned the moment. I asked her what the song was. She said I should know. Then she walked away. I followed her onto a train I wasn't supposed to be on. That was how it started. We weren't fast, but we were inevitable. She liked that I listened more than I talked, said I made her feel grounded, said I saw her clearly. I liked that she made noise in rooms I usually studied in silence. She said I was the anchor. I said she was the spark. When I proposed, I didn't get down on one knee. She hated cliches. I wrote the question on a napkin while we sat at a diner. She cried into her sandwich. She said yes. I've spent the last 17 years chasing other people's worst moments. Sometimes you forget to show up whole when you spend all day absorbing damage. But I was never cruel, never absent without cause, never careless. We made it work. Late nights, missed birthdays, reheated dinners at 1 a.m. She used to wait up for me, reading, always in that gray hoodie she stole from me 2 weeks into dating. I never asked for it back. She made it look better. 3 months ago, I asked her what kind of wedding she wanted. She said quiet, small, just us. So we did it. Courthouse, 2 witnesses. No fuss. Then the cruise, our compromise for skipping everything else. 5 nights in, she said she wanted to try the salsa event, said I didn't have to come, said I wouldn't like it. I told her I'd give her space, told her she deserved fun. She kissed me, told me she loved me. That was less than an hour before I saw her in his arms. I keep replaying that moment. Not the dance, the moment before. The way she stood in the hallway adjusting her bracelet. The one I gave her after closing the Langford case. She looked up and smiled. That smile haunts me now. Not because it was fake, but because it wasn't. My badge isn't a job. It's a contract. With strangers, with silence, with the idea that you can stand still while everything around you breaks. I never brought that badge into our home. At least I thought I didn't. But maybe you bring it everywhere. Maybe that weight changes the way you hold someone, even when you don't mean to. Still, I wasn't the one out there dancing like a stranger. I wasn't the one leaning into another man's hands, and I wasn't the one who smiled when I was caught. I didn't say anything that night. Not to her. Not after. She came back to the room hours later. I was sitting at the desk, shoes off, staring at the ocean. She didn't ask if I'd seen. I didn't tell her I had. We slept in the same bed. Backs turned, 1 inch between us that felt like miles. When she woke, she made coffee. Didn't speak. And I watched her stir in the cream with the same rhythm I'd seen her use on the dance floor. I said nothing, because sometimes silence isn't peace, it's preparation. I didn't want to see it. That's the part I keep coming back to. Not the footage. Not the glances. Not even the way his voice sounded too familiar when he said her name. It's that part of me, the one trained to notice, to question, to press, was choosing not to, because there's a line between instinct and suspicion. And sometimes you stand there hoping you're wrong just long enough for something to go wrong. She started brushing her hair before bed again, wearing lipstick for daytime events, leaving the cabin early and coming back later, always with new stories and no details. The music from the workshops followed her in the hallway, Latin rhythm. Close counts. The kind of tempo where bodies aren't just moving. They're communicating. And then there was Milo. The cruise brochure called him a movement catalyst. What he really was a professional boundary pusher. He didn't break rules. He bent them slowly until no one remembered where the line had been. He danced like his body wasn't governed by consequences. And people loved that, because most of them were here to escape something. A routine, a disappointment, a silence back home. I wasn't. I was here to honor a promise. A week for her. A pause in the middle of a busy year. A way to say, I still see you, without needing applause for it. But something had shifted. The first time I saw her dancing with him, I told myself it was part of the itinerary. The second time, I told myself it was coincidence. By the third, I wasn't telling myself anything anymore. One night, I came back from a quiet walk on the upper deck, my usual routine, and saw her in our cabin, sitting cross-legged on the bed, reviewing footage on the ship-issued tablet. It wasn't casual. She had headphones in, the room was dark, and her eyes were fixed on the screen like she was studying for a final exam. I stayed quiet. Watched from the hallway. On the screen, Milo's hand touched the small of her back. Her eyes closed. Just for a beat. She rewound that section, played it again, then paused it, right at the point where their heads tilted toward each other but didn't touch. She sat there like that for several seconds, just staring. No emotion on her face, but none needed. The pause said enough. I stepped inside. She pulled off the headphones, smiled too quickly, and said, "Just reviewing posture. He said my hip alignment's better this round." I nodded once. Didn't ask. Didn't press. Because I didn't want to be the man who interrogates his wife on vacation. I didn't want to be the cop who couldn't take a day off. Instead, I walked to the nightstand, opened the drawer, and stared down at the badge. Didn't touch it. Didn't need to. Some men carry weapons. Others carry certainty. That night, I carried neither. Just questions I didn't want to know the answers to. Later, I lay awake while she slept. Her breathing slow, controlled, almost patterned. It didn't sound like rest. It sounded like someone marking time, like she was holding her breath between lies. And I tried to remember the last time I saw her dance with joy, real joy, not performance, not precision, just joy. It had been years. We used to go to this little Italian place on 8th and Main, Tuesday nights. They had a jazz duo, piano and stand-up bass. Nothing fancy. She'd sip wine and tap her fingers on the table, then drag me to the small floor they cleared near the bar. I wasn't good. She didn't care. She used to whisper, "Just follow the breath, not the beat." But the breath between us now felt held, like we were both bracing. The next day she performed again. It was a couple's workshop. She didn't have a partner when it started, but Milo stepped in before the count reached 4. The choreography was light, playful, but their timing was too perfect. Not learned, lived. They moved like two people who'd been practicing privately, inside jokes and footwork, glances that weren't part of the routine. At one point she laughed, real, full-throated, the kind I hadn't heard in months, not because we weren't happy, but because she'd stopped letting me be the reason. I stood in the corner, didn't record, didn't blink, just watched. Not for proof, for truth. She caught my eye once, mid-pirouette, and held it for a second longer than the step required. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even guilt. It was distance, measured, practiced, chosen. After the session, she didn't come to find me. I returned to the cabin alone, sat on the edge of the bed, and reviewed the ship's schedule. Found a blank notepad in the drawer, wrote nothing. Sometimes a blank page says more than a report. Later that night, I stood on the balcony, watched the ocean blur beneath the hull, waves slicing themselves clean over and over. That's how it felt inside me, like I was cutting something apart in silence, trying not to bleed. I pulled the badge from the drawer and held it in my palm. It wasn't for justice tonight. It was for alignment. To remind myself that I wasn't here to arrest anyone. I was here to stay upright when the floor shifted. Because men like me, we don't accuse. We verify. And when the time comes, we respond. On the third night, she performed solo. Different room, dim lights, an audience made of strangers and shadowed glances. The music was slow, deliberate, strings layered over piano. It sounded like memory, the kind you try to forget but find yourself humming anyway. She walked onto the floor in a long red dress, not the one I'd seen in her suitcase. This one was fitted, confident, intentional. She didn't flinch under the spotlight. She absorbed it. Then came the dance. Not fast, not provocative, but loaded. Every step carried meaning. Every turn delivered something unspoken. She moved with control, but not stiffness. There was breath in her motion, breath that didn't seem to belong to me anymore. The crowd leaned forward, stayed still in the back. She turned once, twice, hair catching the light, and paused mid-arc like someone deciding whether to finish the sentence. And then her eyes found mine. Not a glance. A lock, not a question, not a plea, a decision. For less than a second we stood there, me with my arms crossed, her mid-movement. But in that beat, everything landed. She knew I saw. I knew she knew. Then she spun again, extending one hand. Not for me, and the crowd exhaled. There was a lift at the end, small but perfect, a final flourish that earned applause. Everyone clapped, except me. I didn't move, didn't blink, didn't exhale, because I wasn't there to admire. Was there to understand, to listen to the story behind the steps, to the silence between beats, to the moment when elegance becomes something else, something curated, directed. And I realized then this wasn't a performance. It was communication. And I wasn't the audience. After the dance, she held her final pose just a little too long, as if unsure whether to bow or whether this was a farewell she hadn't admitted yet. She left the stage without looking back. I didn't follow. I took the elevator to the upper deck and stood against the railing. The sea was black beneath the lights, waves folding over themselves, tearing and disappearing again. It looked like it was trying to erase something. That's how it felt inside me. Like I was watching pieces of my marriage drift into formality. Back in the cabin, the lights were low. She entered 10 minutes later. No mention of the performance. No smile. Just a towel over her shoulders and an exhale that sounded practiced. I asked how it went. She said, "They liked it." Then she disappeared into the bathroom. I stood there, alone in the quiet. The red dress she wore was draped over the chair, still warm from her body, still sharp with perfume. I ran my hand along the fabric, not possessively, almost like I was collecting evidence I wouldn't file. Later, she came to bed, didn't say goodnight, just pulled the blanket over her and turned away. The space between us wasn't wide, but it felt like jurisdiction. I lay there staring at the ceiling, and for a moment, just a moment, I thought about reaching for her, not for closure, not for forgiveness, just to remember if there was still something to hold. But I didn't. Because when a man sees a pattern, he doesn't interrupt it. He observes it, confirms it, then responds in the way that leaves no trace but changes everything. Turned toward the window and watched the ship slice through the water, and I whispered something no one heard. "You never danced like that for me." He ran, not with his feet in with absence. No apology, no announcement, just a revised itinerary slipped under every door. Milo didn't show up to the final group session. No farewell, no explanation. The cruise staff didn't say his name. They didn't have to. His absence spoke louder than his charm ever did. I wasn't surprised. I've dealt with disappearances before. The kind where a man walks off like nothing happened, because no one made it official. But this time, I did. I requested the guest list, cross-checked it with disembarkation records. A staffer hesitated, but the badge and the tone handled that. Then I called a contact at the embassy in Nassau, explained the pattern, the aliases, the complaints with no follow-up. After that I sat, waited. The ship docked the next morning, bright, windless, forgettable. But I hadn't forgotten. I waited near the customs ramp, civilian clothes, one hand holding a plain folder, the other, in my pocket, thumb-grazing metal, not my weapon, my badge. Milo stepped out with sunglasses and a canvas duffel, no cruise ID, no lanyard. Just posture, polished, practiced. He moved like a man who'd done this before. Leave before the heat builds, disappear before the pattern forms. He didn't see me at first. Then he did. He flinched, Subtle, but enough. "Hey," he said, like we were acquaintances sharing a cab. I said nothing. Just blocked his path. "Going somewhere?" He smiled. Slow, like he was still trying to sell something. "Just heading out for a few days, you know how it is, and ports are ports." I held up the folder. Inside, names of women, aliases. The bartender's statement. That security still of, his hand on her cheek. He reached for it. I didn't let go. "You don't have anything solid," he said. "You're not even on duty. This isn't your jurisdiction." "I know," I said. "I'm not wearing my badge today." He tilted his head, confused for a beat. "I'm wearing my name." His mouth twitched, a smile that didn't finish forming. "You think that makes you better than me?" he asked, stepping slightly forward. "No," I replied. "It makes me done with you." He paused, eyes scanning, calculating. Then he said it, low, like a last card on the table. "She came back to me. You know, not just for dance, you should ask her what she left in theater room B." I didn't react, didn't blink. He leaned in, softer. "She's not innocent. None of them are. You're just the man they go home to because you keep things clean." There, it was the play, the bait, the flick of the blade without fingerprints. "You can't prove intent," he added. "This won't stick. It never does." "I'm not here to make it stick," I said. He raised an eyebrow. "Then what?" I stepped closer, lowered my voice to something private. "I'm here to make sure the next time you try this, there's a record. A name flagged. Complaint remembered. A bartender who still works this route. I don't need you in handcuffs, I just need the floor under you to shift." He scoffed. "That's not justice." "No," I said. "That's foundation." He laughed. Short, bitter. "You think any of this matters?" I looked at the bag. Instructor shirts. Still folded, still tagged. "You're carrying uniforms you'll never wear again." He said nothing. I stepped aside, let him pass. He walked slow, controlled, but he knew. As he reached the terminal exit, 2 port officers crossed the gangway. They paused near me. I didn't say a word, just nodded. They turned, followed. Not because, I asked, because it was the right thing to do. I didn't wait for what came next. Didn't need to. Instead, I sat on a bench just outside the terminal, opened the folder one last time, flipped past the names, the documents, the stills. Then I folded it shut, ripped it clean down the center, dropped it in the waste bin at my feet. Not to forget. To finish. Some men leave trails, others leave warnings, and some of us, we leave boundaries. Because justice isn't always about what you bring down. Sometimes it's about what you refuse to let rise again. We docked at dawn. Clear skies, calm tide. The kind of morning where nothing looks wrong. Even when everything is different. Couples posed for photos near the upper deck. Crew members handed out surveys and fake smiles. The ship had already moved on. She stood beside me in line, no hand in mine. No words between us. Only the tension of 2 people who knew something sacred had been altered and wouldn't be restored. When it was our turn to disembark, she hesitated. Just for a second. Like stepping onto solid ground meant admitting what had shifted beneath us. We rode home in separate cars, separate playlists, separate stories we hadn't yet rehearsed. Back at the apartment, everything looked exactly as we'd left it. A coat draped over a chair, mail stacked on the counter, the calendar still frozen on the week before the cruise. She unpacked in the guest room. Didn't call it that, but we both knew. The language we used was quiet now. Careful. Not out of fear. Out of understanding. That night, we ate takeout on opposite ends of the couch. Low voices. Low light, like 2 survivors unsure if they were still allies. The next morning, I made coffee. Black, same mug, same motions. But the weight of the cup felt different, like I was holding a routine that no longer fit. She came into the kitchen barefoot, phone in hand, eyes cautious. Told me she'd found a new dance studio, group classes, open windows, no instructors. with blurred boundaries. I nodded. Sounds better. She paused, then asked, "Am I still her?" The question hung in the air, not rhetorical, not dramatic, just real. I didn't answer right away, because I didn't know if she meant the woman from before the cruise or the one who danced with him while I watched. So I said, "You get to choose who shows up next." She nodded, didn't smile, just left the room. The way someone leaves a space that doesn't belong to them anymore. Later that afternoon, I went for a drive. Nowhere in mind. Just asphalt, traffic lights, and the quiet hum of old streets. At a red light, I reached into the glove compartment, pulled out the folded photo the ship's head of security had given me, the one of Milo's hand on her cheek, her eyes closed. Looked at it once, then again. Then held it outside the passenger window and let the wind take it. Not out of rage. Not for release. Just to remind myself that some things don't belong in drawers. They belong in the past. When I got home, she was gone. Left a note on the fridge that read, "Thank you for watching," even when I couldn't. No tears. No dramatics. Just a single sentence from someone who finally understood what had been seen. I sat on the edge of the bed, took off my watch, and glanced at the nightstand. The badge was still there. Not as an artifact, not as a threat, but as a reminder. Some men wear it on duty, others carry it in the way they walk, the way they speak, the way they end things without violence and without forgetting. The badge doesn't make you right. It reminds you to stay right, even when you're off the clock, even when the case is personal, especially then. I boxed up the cruise photos, labeled the folder not evidence, but conduct. Because that's what this was, not revenge, not retribution, just discipline. 3 days later, I was back on shift. Different burrow. Same instincts. Someone asked me if I'd had a good honeymoon. I said, it was clarifying. They laughed like I'd told a joke. I didn't correct them, because sometimes closure isn't about what you say, it's about what you carry. And me? I carry a badge, not just in my waistband, but in my decisions. And some days that's the only jurisdiction a man needs. The gentleman's revenge isn't loud, but it's always personal. If this felt personal, make it personal. Subscribe now, and don't miss tomorrow's story.